The park encounter that changed everything. It was a crisp autumn afternoon in Clearwater, a small suburban town where life moved at a leisurely pace. The town was picturesque, with tree-lined streets, tidy front lawns, and a park at its heart that buzzed with the sound of children laughing and playing. Darren Campbell, a devoted father, was spending the day with his adopted daughter, Emma. Emma, a vivacious 7-year-old with curly blonde hair and a contagious laugh, was the center of Darren's world. They were an unlikely pair to the casual observer. Darren, a tall black man with a deep, warm voice, and Emma, a petite girl with porcelain skin and hair like spun gold. But to them, none of that mattered. They were family in every sense of the word. Emma giggled as Darren pushed her on the swing, her tiny legs pumping in rhythm as she soared higher. "Higher, Daddy," she called out, her laughter echoing through the park. Darren couldn't help but grin. Moments like this reminded him why he had fought so hard to adopt her. Life hadn't been easy for either of them, but they had each other, and that was enough. As Darren pushed Emma, a woman named Karen Matthews entered the park. Karen was in her late 40s, with a meticulously styled bob and an air of authority. She was the type of person who prided herself on being involved in the community, whether anyone wanted her involvement or not. As she walked her small dog, Karen's eyes scanned the park with the scrutiny of a self-appointed guardian. When her gaze landed on Darren and Emma, she froze. To Karen, something didn't seem right. A black man with a white child. The idea gnawed at her, fueled by stereotypes and stories she consumed from sensational news headlines. Her pulse quickened, and her mind filled with unfounded assumptions. Karen took out her phone and dialed 911. Darren was oblivious to the trouble brewing until he noticed Karen standing a few yards away, staring at him with a mixture of suspicion and determination. He felt a knot form in his stomach. He was used to being the subject of uncomfortable stares, but something about Karen's expression unsettled him. Emma noticed too. "Daddy, why is that lady looking at us?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. Darren crouched down to her level, brushing a curl from her face. "I don't know, sweetheart. But don't worry about it. Let's keep playing." Minutes later, the sound of approaching sirens shattered the tranquil park atmosphere. Darren's heart sank as 2 police cars pulled up near the playground, their red and blue lights flashing. Parents gathered their children, whispering nervously as 2 officers stepped out of their cars and made their way toward Darren and Emma. "Excuse me, sir," one of the officers began, his tone professional but guarded. "We received a call about a potential concern involving your interaction with this child. Can you explain your relationship to her?" Darren's stomach churned. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed his hurt. "This is my daughter, Emma," he said, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. "We're just spending the afternoon at the park." Emma clung to Darren's leg, her wide eyes darting between the officers. "He's my daddy," she said, her voice trembling. "Why are you asking?" One of the officers glanced at the other before turning back to Darren. "Sir, do you have identification? Something that can verify your relationship to her?" Darren nodded, his movements slow and deliberate. "I do," he said, reaching into his pocket for his wallet. He handed over his driver's license and a folded photo, a treasured keepsake showing him, Emma, and his late wife, Sarah, on the day they brought Emma home from the adoption center. The officers examined the photo, their expressions softening as they took in the image of a beaming family. The tension in the air began to dissipate. "Thank you, sir," one officer said, handing back the photo and license. "It's clear there's no issue here. We apologize for the inconvenience." Darren forced a tight smile. "I understand you're just doing your job, but maybe next time, consider the damage these assumptions can cause." As the officers walked away, Karen lingered at the edge of the playground, her face pale with realization. Darren turned to her, his voice firm but calm. "Ma'am, I'd like to speak with you." Karen hesitated, but the weight of Darren's gaze compelled her to approach. I thought I was protecting the child," she stammered, her voice defensive. Darren's eyes burned with quiet intensity. "You thought you were protecting her from me, without asking questions, without even considering that we're a family." Karen opened her mouth to respond but faltered. Darren's words cut through her defenses. "Next time," he said, his tone measured but piercing, "think before you act. Not every family looks the same, but that doesn't make our love any less real." Karen nodded, her face flushed with embarrassment. She muttered a soft, "I'm sorry," before hurrying away, her small dog trotting after her. Darren watched her retreating figure, his chest tight with a mixture of anger and sorrow. He knelt down to Emma's level, pulling her into a hug. "No one can ever change what we are. Emma, you and me, we're family forever." Emma wrapped her arms around his neck, her voice soft but resolute. "Forever and always, Daddy." That night, as Darren tucked Emma into bed, he couldn't shake the weight of the day's events. He kissed her forehead and whispered a promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to protect her from the ignorance and prejudice that still lingered in the world. What Darren didn't realize was that the events of that afternoon were only the beginning. The ripple effects of Karen's call would soon spread through Clearwater, forcing the entire town to confront its assumptions about family, race, and community. And for Darren and Emma, the journey ahead would be one of resilience, hope, and the quiet strength that comes from knowing the power of love. The ripple effect in Clearwater. The events at Clearwater Park didn't end with Karen's hurried apology and retreat. By the next morning, whispers of the incident began weaving their way through the small suburban community. Clearwater was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, or at least thought they did. News traveled fast, often exaggerated, and by the time Darren arrived at work that Monday morning, it was clear that his quiet life was about to be upended. Workplace tensions. Darren worked as a structural engineer for a small firm in Clearwater. He loved his job, finding satisfaction in designing things that would last for generations. But as he walked into the office that morning, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Conversations quieted as he passed by, and a few coworkers avoided his gaze entirely. He could almost hear their unspoken questions. Was it really him in that park? What happened? Tom, his closest friend at work, was particularly distant. Normally, they shared a laugh over coffee before starting the day, but Tom barely managed a weak smile before ducking into his office. Darren decided to let it slide. For now. At lunchtime, Darren sat in the break room, absently picking at a sandwich as he scrolled through his phone. A local news site had picked up the story, titling it 911 Call in Clearwater Park, Sparks Debate About Race and Assumptions. The article was fairly neutral, recounting the incident without naming names, but the comments section was anything but. "They're just doing their jobs," one commenter wrote. "You can't be too careful these days." Another chimed in, "If it was my kid, I'd want someone to call. Better safe than sorry." But not everyone agreed. "This is exactly why we have a problem in this country," one comment read. "You see a black man with a white child, and you automatically think something's wrong. Shameful." Darren sighed, closing the browser. It didn't matter what people thought. They didn't know him or his daughter. But the weight of it lingered, heavy and oppressive. The world he tried so hard to shield Emma from was now encroaching on their lives, and he wasn't sure how to stop it. Emma's school experience. Meanwhile, at Clearwater Elementary, Emma was facing challenges of her own. She loved school, especially art class, where she could paint and draw to her heart's content. But lately, some of her classmates had started acting differently toward her. It started subtly. During recess, Emma approached her best friend, Harper, to play on the jungle gym. But Harper hesitated, glancing at the other children before whispering, "My mom said I shouldn't talk to you for a while." Emma frowned. "Why not? Did I do something wrong?" Harper looked uncomfortable. "I don't know. She just said it's better this way." Emma walked away, confused and hurt. She didn't understand why her friend, Someone she'd shared lunches and secrets with was suddenly avoiding her. At 7 years old, she didn't have the words to articulate what was happening, but the sting of rejection was sharp and immediate. Her teacher, Mrs. Simmons, noticed the shift in Emma's demeanor. Normally a bubbly and enthusiastic student, Emma had grown quieter, her usual bright energy dampened. Mrs. Simmons decided to investigate. "Emma," she said gently one afternoon as the children were packing up their things, "can I talk to you for a moment?" Emma nodded, her small face solemn. Mrs. Simmons knelt to her level, her warm eyes filled with concern. "Is everything okay? Sweetheart, you've seemed a little sad lately." Emma hesitated before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Harper doesn't want to play with me anymore. She said her mom told her not to." Mrs. Simmons's heart sank. She'd been teaching long enough to recognize when outside influences were affecting her students. She placed a comforting hand on Emma's shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Emma. But remember, this isn't about you. It's about things other people don't understand yet." Emma nodded, but the words didn't do much to soothe her confusion. The communities divide. Back in town, the incident at the park became the talk of the local coffee shop, the PTA meetings, and even Sunday church services. Clearwater's residents began taking sides, often based on incomplete or skewed versions of the story. Some defended Darren, saying he was a hard-working father who had done nothing wrong. Others supported Karen, arguing that she was just looking out for the safety of a child. The debate revealed an undercurrent of tension in the town, one that had always existed but was now impossible to ignore. Karen herself was struggling to reconcile what had happened. She had always thought of herself as a good person, someone who cared about her community. But Darren's words at the park had haunted her. "Not every family looks the same, but that doesn't make our love any less real." She couldn't shake the image of Emma clinging to Darren, her face filled with trust and love. Karen began to question her own biases, realizing for the first time how deeply they were rooted. She spent sleepless nights replaying the incident in her mind, wondering how she could make amends. A chance encounter. One afternoon, Darren stopped by a local cafe for a cup of coffee. As he waited in line, he noticed Karen sitting at a corner table, her face pale and drawn. She spotted him too, and for a moment, their eyes met. Karen hesitated, then stood and approached him. "Darren," she began, her voice shaky. I want to apologize. Again, for what happened at the park." Darren's jaw tightened. He wasn't sure he wanted to have this conversation, especially not in the middle of a crowded cafe. But something in Karen's expression gave him pause. She looked genuinely remorseful. "I'm listening," he said, his tone guarded. Karen swallowed hard. "I didn't think. I saw you with Emma. And I assumed the worst. And I realize now how wrong I was. I've been trying to figure out how to fix it, but I know an apology isn't enough." Darren studied her for a moment. "What you did hurt my daughter," he said quietly. "She doesn't understand why her friends are acting differently toward her, why people are looking at us like we don't belong." Karen's eyes filled with tears. "I never wanted that. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now that I was just acting out of ignorance." Darren nodded, his expression softening slightly. "If you're serious about making it right, you can start by educating yourself and others. Ignorance doesn't go away on its own. It takes effort." Karen nodded fervently. "I will. I promise." The start of change. Karen left the cafe feeling a mix of shame and determination. She contacted a local community group focused on diversity and inclusion and asked how she could get involved. She also reached out to the PTA at Emma's school, suggesting they host an event to celebrate different types of families. Meanwhile, Darren and his wife, Angela, decided to take proactive steps to protect Emma from further hurt. They met with Mrs. Simmons to discuss ways the school could support Emma and educate her classmates about diversity. Mrs. Simmons proposed a Family Week project, where students could share stories about their own families and learn about others. Darren and Angela eagerly agreed. As plans for Family Week took shape, Darren began to feel a glimmer of hope. It wouldn't erase what had happened, but it was a step toward creating a better environment for Emma and for the community as a whole. Seeds of change. The ripple effects of the park incident continued to spread, and Darren found himself at the center of a growing movement in Clearwater. The town, though small, was now buzzing with conversations about family, race, and the assumptions people made about one another. While many were supportive of Darren and his family, others resisted the changes that were starting to take root. The town meeting. 2 weeks after the incident, Karen Matthews made an unexpected move. She approached a local community group, Clearwater Together, which focused on fostering inclusivity and cultural understanding. She proposed hosting a town meeting to address the biases that had come to light. To her surprise, the group welcomed the idea and offered to organize the event. Word of the meeting spread quickly, and by the evening of the event, the Clearwater Community Center was packed. Rows of folding chairs were filled with familiar faces, some eager, some skeptical. Darren and his wife, Angela, sat near the front, unsure of what to expect but determined to be present. Karen stood at the podium, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the microphone. She took a deep breath and scanned the room, her eyes lingering briefly on Darren. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Thank you all for being here tonight. I've asked for this meeting because I believe it's time we, as a community, confront some uncomfortable truths." She paused, letting her words sink in. 2 weeks ago, I made a mistake. A serious mistake. I saw a situation that I didn't understand, and instead of seeking clarity, I acted out of fear and prejudice. I called the police on a father and his daughter because I assumed, wrongly, that something was amiss. The room was silent, save for the occasional rustle of a chair or the murmur of someone shifting in their seat. Karen continued, her voice gaining strength. "What I did was wrong. But it also revealed something larger, something that affects all of us. How many of us have made similar assumptions? How many of us have judged others without truly knowing their stories?" Darren watched as Karen spoke, his emotions a mix of anger, skepticism, and reluctant respect. She was putting herself on the line, and while he didn't know if her words would lead to real change, he appreciated the effort. After Karen finished, the floor was open for others to speak. Darren hesitated but eventually stood, his tall frame commanding attention as he made his way to the podium. "Thank you," he began, his deep voice resonating through the room. "Thank you for organizing this meeting. And thank you, Karen, for owning up to your mistake. That takes courage." He paused, glancing around the room. But courage isn't enough. Words aren't enough. What happened at the park didn't just affect me. It affected my daughter. Emma is 7 years old. She doesn't understand why people treat her differently, why her friends suddenly don't want to play with her. And I have to look her in the eyes every night and explain a world that, quite frankly, doesn't make sense. Darren's voice grew stronger as he continued. "This isn't just about one incident. It's about the way we see each other. It's about the stories we tell ourselves about who belongs and who doesn't. My family might not look like the traditional families you're used to, but we're just like you. We laugh, we cry, we love, and we deserve the same respect and dignity as anyone else." When Darren finished, the room erupted into applause. Angela, sitting in the front row, wiped away a tear, her heart swelling with pride. Family Week at school. As the town wrestled with its biases, Clearwater Elementary prepared for its first ever Family Week, an initiative spearheaded by Mrs. Simmons. The project was designed to celebrate diversity and teach students about different types of families, cultures, and traditions. Emma was excited but nervous. She had always been proud of her family, but the recent changes in her classmates' behavior had shaken her confidence. Angela encouraged her, helping her pick out photos and stories to share with her class. On the first day of Family Week, Mrs. Simmons stood in front of her class, a large world map behind her. "This week, She announced, "We're going to learn about families from all over the world, and we're going to celebrate how special and unique each family is." The students were invited to bring in items or stories that represented their families. Emma brought a scrapbook filled with photos of her and Darren, as well as a small stuffed bear that had been her first gift from him. When it was Emma's turn to present, she stood at the front of the class, clutching the scrapbook tightly. "This is my daddy," she began, pointing to a photo of her and Darren at the beach. "He adopted me when I was 3. My mommy, she's in heaven now. But my daddy takes care of me. He makes me pancakes on Sundays, and he tells me stories before bed. He's my best friend." As Emma spoke, Mrs. Simmons noticed a shift in the room. The students, many of whom had been distant or unsure around Emma, began to see her in a new light. When she finished, there was a smattering of applause, and Harper, her former best friend, gave her a shy smile. During recess that day, Harper approached Emma near the swings. "Hey," she said, scuffing her shoe in the dirt. "I liked your scrapbook. I didn't know your daddy was so cool." Emma beamed. "He is. Do you want to play?" Harper nodded, and the two girls ran off together, their laughter ringing through the playground. Conversations at home. While Emma found solace at school, Darren and Angela continued to navigate the complexities of adult interactions. Darren's workplace had grown quieter since the park incident, and while some colleagues offered support, others avoided him altogether. One evening, Darren and Angela sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea and discussing the events of the past few weeks. "Do you think it's getting better?" Angela asked, her brow furrowed. Darren shrugged. "I think it's too soon to tell. People are talking, which is good, but talk doesn't always lead to change." Angela nodded thoughtfully. "What about Karen? Do you believe she's sincere?" Darren considered the question. "I think she's trying, and I think she feels genuinely remorseful. But sincerity only matters if it leads to action." Angela reached across the table, taking his hand. "Well, whatever happens, we'll face it together. You, me, and Emma. We're stronger than this." Darren squeezed her hand, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips. "We are. And no matter what, I'll keep fighting. For us, for Emma, and for anyone else who's been made to feel like they don't belong." The beginning of a movement. The ripple effects of Darren's speech at the town meeting and the success of Family Week at Clearwater Elementary began to inspire others. A local church organized a seminar on diversity and inclusion, inviting speakers from different backgrounds to share their stories. The library hosted a book club featuring authors who wrote about race, family, and belonging. Slowly but surely, Clearwater was changing. Karen, for her part, became an active member of Clearwater Together. She volunteered her time to organize events and reach out to community members who were resistant to change. Though she still carried the weight of her mistake, she channeled her guilt into action, determined to make amends. Darren, Angela, and Emma continued to live their lives, aware that the world around them wasn't perfect, but hopeful that it was moving in the right direction. They knew there would be challenges ahead, but they also knew they weren't alone. And for Darren, that knowledge made all the difference. Unveiling hidden prejudices. The winds of change in Clearwater were slow, but they had started to blow. The park incident and its aftermath had forced the town to confront uncomfortable truths. However, progress was neither linear nor universal, and the ripple effects reached places Darren and his family hadn't anticipated. The backlash. In the weeks following the town meeting and the success of Family Week at Clearwater Elementary, the growing conversations about race and family dynamics began to elicit resistance from certain corners of the community. While many residents embraced the opportunity for reflection and growth, others felt uncomfortable with the changes taking place. A small but vocal group of parents began voicing their discontent during PTA meetings. They argued that the focus on diversity and inclusion was unnecessary and divisive. "Why can't we just let kids be kids?" One parent, Sharon Foster, exclaimed during a particularly heated discussion. All this talk about race and differences, it's planting ideas in their heads that don't need to be there. Angela attended these meetings faithfully, and as Sharon's words hung in the air, she raised her hand, her voice steady and resolute. With all due respect, Sharon, ignoring these issues doesn't make them go away. My daughter, Emma, is already facing questions and assumptions from her classmates. If we don't teach our children to understand and respect differences, they'll grow up perpetuating the same biases. Sharon's face flushed. I'm just saying we shouldn't be making a big deal out of it. Kids don't see color unless we make them. Angela's patience wore thin. That's a nice sentiment, Sharon, but it's not reality. Emma is 7, and she's already being treated differently because of how our family looks. Pretending these issues don't exist won't protect her or any of our kids. The room fell silent, and Angela's words lingered, heavy and undeniable. Some parents nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uncomfortable glances. The divide in the community was becoming increasingly apparent. Emma's growing awareness. At home, Emma was beginning to ask questions that Darren and Angela had been dreading but preparing for. One evening, as Darren helped her with her homework, Emma looked up and asked, "Daddy, why do some people look at us like we're not supposed to be together?" Darren paused, his heart sinking. He had known this question would come eventually, but it still stung. "Well, sweetheart," he began carefully, "sometimes people don't understand things that are different from what they're used to. And when they don't understand, they can make unfair assumptions." Emma frowned. "But we're not different. You're my daddy. That's all." Darren smiled, his chest tightening with emotion. "You're absolutely right, but not everyone sees the world the way we do. That's why we have to show them, by being kind, by being strong, and by never letting their opinions change how we feel about each other." Emma nodded, her small face resolute. "Okay, Daddy. I'll be strong." Darren leaned over and kissed her forehead. "That's my girl." An unexpected ally. While tension simmered in some parts of Clearwater, Darren and Angela were surprised to find support from an unexpected source. Sharon's teenage son, Jake. A high school senior with a passion for videography, Jake had been quietly observing the changes in town and decided to document the community's journey. One afternoon, Jake approached Darren outside the hardware store. "Mr. Campbell," he began, shifting nervously from foot to foot, "I was wondering if I could interview you for a project I'm working on." Darren raised an eyebrow. "What kind of project?" Jake hesitated before answering. "I'm making a short film about how our town is changing, how people are learning to see things differently. I think your story is a big part of that." Darren was taken aback but intrigued. "I appreciate the thought, Jake. What made you want to do this?" Jake shrugged, his expression earnest. "Honestly, I've been thinking a lot about what's been happening since the park thing. And my mom, well, she doesn't really get it. But I do. I want to help other people get it too." Darren studied the teenager, impressed by his maturity. "All right," he said finally. "I'll do it. But only if you promise to keep it real. No sugarcoating." Jake grinned. "Deal." The film that sparked a fire. Over the next few weeks, Jake interviewed Darren, Angela, Emma, and several other residents of Clearwater. He captured raw, emotional stories. Parents reflecting on their own biases, children discussing what they'd learned during family week, and even Karen Matthews, who spoke candidly about her journey from ignorance to understanding. Jake poured his heart into the project, staying up late editing footage and carefully crafting a narrative that balanced hope and honesty. When the film was finished, he titled it Clearwater, A Town's Journey, and arranged for it to be screened at the community center. On the night of the screening, the center was packed. People from all walks of life filled the room, curious to see the film that had already generated buzz. Darren and Angela sat near the front, Emma perched on Darren's lap. As the lights dimmed and the film began, the audience was drawn into a series of powerful vignettes. Darren's voice was one of the first to be heard, recounting the park incident and its impact on his family. Footage of Emma proudly presenting her scrapbook at school was juxtaposed with interviews of other children who admitted they'd never thought about what it meant to have a family that looked different from their own. Karen's segment was particularly moving. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice trembling. "But I wasn't. I was acting out of fear. And I hurt a family because of it. That's something I'll carry with me forever, but I'm trying to do better. We all need to do better." By the time the film ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The audience erupted into applause, and Jake, who had been standing nervously in the back, was pulled to the front by his friends. He looked out at the crowd, his face flushed with emotion. "I made this because I believe Clearwater can be better," he said. "And it starts with all of us." A shift in the wind. The impact of Jake's film was immediate and profound. Conversations that had been confined to whispers were now happening openly, in coffee shops, at school events, and around dinner tables. Parents who had been resistant to change began reconsidering their perspectives, spurred by the voices and stories they had seen on screen. Sharon, who had initially dismissed the need for these conversations, approached Darren at the grocery store a few days after the screening. "Darren," she began, her tone hesitant, "I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much my words and my actions were hurting people. Watching Jake's film made me see things differently." Darren nodded, his expression guarded but not unkind. "I appreciate that, Sharon. It's a start." Emma's triumph. At school, Emma noticed a change in her classmates. Harper, who had once distanced herself, was now one of her closest friends again. Other children who had been hesitant to approach her began including her in games and conversations. During art class one day, Emma painted a picture of her family, a bright, colorful scene of her, Darren, and Angela holding hands in front of their house. Mrs. Simmons hung the painting on the classroom wall, a symbol of the progress the school and the town had made. A new chapter. As Clearwater began to heal and grow, Darren and Angela felt a renewed sense of hope. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were heartened by the small victories they had witnessed. Their family had become a catalyst for change, and while the journey was far from over, they were ready to face whatever came next. The road to resilience. The events that unfolded in Clearwater had left their mark on Darren, Angela, and Emma, but as they moved forward, they realized that change wasn't a single moment. It was a journey. While the town began to embrace growth, old prejudices and challenges lingered, testing the strength of their family and the community's resolve. A harsh reminder. Despite the progress sparked by the town meeting, Family Week, and Jake's film, not everyone in Clearwater welcomed the shift. Darren was reminded of this one Friday evening when he and Angela went out to dinner at a local restaurant. They chose a cozy spot they'd frequented for years, a place where the staff greeted them warmly and the food was reliably good. That night, however, the warmth felt different. While the hostess welcomed them with a smile, Darren noticed the quick glances exchanged between two men at the bar. They muttered something under their breath, followed by a chuckle that made the hair on Darren's neck stand up. He caught snippets of their conversation, words like overreaction and playing the victim. Angela noticed too. She reached for Darren's hand under the table, squeezing it gently. "Ignore them," she whispered. "They don't define us." Darren nodded, but the sting remained. He had grown accustomed to these moments over the years, but after everything that had happened, he had hoped they would become less frequent. That hope, it seemed, was premature. When the waitress came to take their order, her voice was hesitant, as if she had sensed the tension in the room. "Can I get you anything to start?" she asked, her eyes flicking toward the men at the bar. Darren smiled politely. "Just water for now, thanks." The evening passed uneventfully, but the encounter stayed with Darren. It was a reminder that change wasn't universal, that some people clung to their ignorance like a lifeline, but it also strengthened his resolve. He refused to let moments like these define him or his family. Emma's moment of courage. Meanwhile, Emma was beginning to find her voice. The lessons she had learned during family week and the encouragement she received from her parents and teacher had given her a newfound confidence. That confidence was put to the test one afternoon during recess. Emma was playing on the swings when she overheard a group of older boys talking nearby. They were teasing another child, a boy named Lucas, whose family had recently moved to Clearwater. Lucas was shy and soft-spoken, and his mixed heritage made him stand out in the predominantly white school. "Hey, Lucas," one of the boys sneered, "why don't you go back to wherever you came from?" Lucas's face turned red, and he looked down, clearly uncomfortable. Emma's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She thought of the times she had felt different, the times she had been stared at or excluded. Taking a deep breath, she hopped off the swing and marched over to the boys. "Leave him alone," she said, her voice loud and firm. The boys turned to her, surprised. "What's it to you?" one of them asked, his tone mocking. "It's not okay to be mean just because someone's different," Emma shot back. "My daddy says that what makes us different makes us special. Lucas is special, and you don't get to treat him like he's not." For a moment, the boys seemed unsure of how to respond. Then, muttering something about how they were just joking, they walked away. Emma turned to Lucas, who was still looking at the ground. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. Lucas nodded, a small smile breaking across his face. "Thanks, Emma." As they walked back to the swings together, Emma felt a swell of pride. She had stood up for someone else, just like her daddy always told her to. Karen's continued journey. Karen Matthews had come a long way since the day at the park, but her journey was far from over. She had thrown herself into volunteer work with Clearwater Together, organizing events and speaking out about her own biases. But she also faced resistance, particularly from her own family. Her older brother, Ron, had been outspoken in his criticism of her actions. "You're making a fool of yourself, Karen," he said one evening over dinner. "Why are you bending over backward for people who don't even care about us?" Karen set down her fork, her jaw tightening. "They do care, Ron. Darren and his family care about this community just as much as we do. Probably more, considering what they've had to deal with." Ron scoffed. "You're letting guilt cloud your judgment." "It's not guilt," Karen snapped. "It's understanding. And maybe if you open your mind a little, you'd see that too." The argument ended in silence, but Karen couldn't shake the frustration. She had learned to see the world differently, but convincing others to do the same was a battle she hadn't anticipated. Still, she was determined to keep trying. The Festival of Unity. As summer approached, Clearwater Together organized its largest event yet, the Festival of Unity. It was a celebration of the town's diversity, featuring food, music, and art from different cultures. Darren and Angela were invited to be guest speakers, and Emma was thrilled to participate in the children's activities. The festival drew a larger crowd than anyone had expected. Families filled the park, sampling dishes from food trucks, watching performances, and browsing booths showcasing everything from African textiles to Latin American crafts. When it was Darren's turn to speak, he stood on the small stage, looking out at the sea of faces. For the first time in weeks, he felt hopeful. "Thank you all for being here today," he began. "This festival isn't just about celebrating our differences. It's about recognizing what unites us. We all want the same things: love, respect, and a sense of belonging." He paused, letting his words settle. "My family has faced challenges, but we've also seen the best of this community. We've seen people stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. And that gives me hope. Hope that we can build a town where everyone feels welcome." The crowd erupted into applause, and Darren stepped off the stage, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. Angela greeted him with a hug, and Emma beamed up at him, her pride shining as brightly as the summer sun. The road ahead. The Festival of Unity was a turning point for Clearwater. It didn't solve all the town's problems. Prejudice and ignorance still lingered in some corners, but it created a foundation for growth. Darren and Angela continued to advocate for inclusivity, using their voices to inspire change. Emma thrived, her confidence growing with each passing day. She became a symbol of resilience and hope, a reminder that even in the face of adversity, love and courage could prevail. As the Campbells walked home from the festival that evening, Emma held her parents' hands tightly. "Daddy," she said, looking up at Darren, "we're strong, right?" Darren smiled, his heart full. "That's right, sweetheart. We're strong, and together we can handle anything." The road to resilience was long, but for Darren, Angela, and Emma, it was a journey worth taking. One step, one conversation, and one act of kindness at a time. Building a legacy. The Festival of Unity marked a pivotal moment for Clearwater. It was a day of celebration, reflection, and connection, but the Campbells knew that the work wasn't done. Darren, Angela, and Emma were determined not just to heal their family from the wounds inflicted by prejudice, but to create a lasting impact that would ripple through the town for years to come. This was no longer about enduring the challenges. It was about shaping the future. The classroom project. The Monday following the festival, Emma walked into school with a new sense of confidence. The atmosphere in the classroom had shifted since Family Week and the festival. Her teacher, Mrs. Simmons, decided to build on the momentum with a new project. What makes my family special? Each student was tasked with creating a presentation about their family's unique story. They could use drawings, photographs, or anything that represented who they were. Emma was thrilled at the opportunity to share more about her family. At home, she pored over old photos with Darren and Angela. There were pictures of her first trip to the beach, her adoption day, and even a few of her late mother, Sarah. Darren hesitated before pulling out a framed photo of Sarah holding Emma as a baby. "I think you should include this one," he said softly. Emma looked at the picture, her young face filled with curiosity. "That's my first mommy, right?" Darren nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Yes, sweetheart. She loved you very much, just like Angela, and I do." Emma beamed. "Then I'll include it. I want everyone to know how much love I have in my family." When presentation day arrived, Emma stood confidently at the front of the room. She showed her scrapbook, describing each picture with pride. "This is my daddy, Darren. He adopted me when I was little and makes the best pancakes ever. This is my mommy, Angela. She helps me with my homework and takes me on fun trips. And this is my first mommy, Sarah. Even though she's in heaven, she'll always be a part of my family." The room was silent as Emma finished, her words resonating with her classmates. Even the children who had once avoided her seemed captivated. When she sat down, her friend Harper leaned over and whispered, "Your family is awesome." For Emma, it was a small but powerful victory, a moment where she felt truly seen and accepted. Darren's work with the council. While Emma thrived at school, Darren found himself stepping into a new role in the community. After the success of the Festival of Unity, the Clearwater Town Council invited him to join a task force focused on fostering inclusivity and addressing systemic biases. The task force met weekly, and while the discussions were often challenging, Darren approached them with the same precision and determination he brought to his engineering work. One of the group's first initiatives was to create a mentorship program connecting local businesses with young people from diverse backgrounds. Darren spearheaded the effort, working closely with a local entrepreneur, Carla Espinosa, who owned a bakery in town. Carla, a single mother and one of the few Hispanic business owners in Clearwater, was eager to support the initiative. "This program is about more than just teaching skills," Darren explained during one meeting. "It's about showing these kids that they belong here, that their dreams matter." The mentorship program launched a month later, pairing high school students with business owners who could teach them everything from marketing to carpentry. Darren took on 2 mentees, young men named Marcus and Eli, who were eager to learn about engineering. On their first day, Darren brought them to his office and showed them a blueprint he was working on. "This," he said, pointing to the intricate lines and calculations, "is the foundation of a building. But just like buildings, communities need strong foundations too. And you're part of that foundation. The boys nodded, their eyes lighting up with possibility. For Darren, it was a reminder that the future wasn't just about correcting past mistakes. It was about building something better. Karen's growing resolve. Karen Matthews, meanwhile, continued her personal transformation. Inspired by her experiences with Clearwater Together, she began writing a series of opinion pieces for the town's local newspaper. Her articles tackled topics like unconscious bias, the importance of inclusivity, and her own journey from ignorance to understanding. One article, titled "The Day I Let Fear Define Me, and How I Chose to Change," gained particular attention. In it, Karen recounted the park incident, acknowledging her mistake and urging others to confront their own prejudices. "It's not easy to admit when you've been wrong," she wrote. "But growth begins with discomfort. I was uncomfortable with the idea that a family could look different from mine. I let that discomfort lead me to hurt an innocent man and his daughter. I can't undo that hurt, but I can choose to learn from it. And so can you." The article sparked a flood of responses. Some applauded Karen's honesty and bravery, while others dismissed her as pandering. But Karen wasn't deterred. She continued writing, determined to keep the conversation alive. Emma's fundraiser. Inspired by her parents and Karen's efforts, Emma decided to take action of her own. After learning about the mentorship program Darren was leading, Emma wanted to help other kids feel included too. She approached Darren one evening with an idea. "Daddy," she said, "what if we had a big party for all the kids in town? With games and food and music. It could be like the festival, but just for us." Darren smiled, impressed by her initiative. "That's a great idea, Emma. What would you want to call it?" Emma thought for a moment. "The Friendship Fair." With Darren and Angela's help, Emma organized a fundraiser to cover the costs of the fair. She sold homemade bracelets at school, and Angela helped her bake cookies to sell at the local farmers market. Word spread quickly, and soon donations were pouring in from families across Clearwater. On the day of the Friendship Fair, the park was filled with laughter and music. Children played games, shared snacks, and danced to live music performed by a local band. Emma stood proudly at the entrance, greeting each guest with a smile. "This is the best day ever," she told Darren as they watched the kids play. "I'm so glad we did this." Darren hugged her tightly. "You made this happen, Emma. You brought everyone together." A legacy of love. As summer turned to fall, the Campbells reflected on how far they, and the town, had come. The road hadn't been easy, but the progress was undeniable. Clearwater was no longer the same town it had been on that fateful day in the park. It was a place where conversations about race, family, and belonging were happening openly, where people were learning and growing together. For Darren, Angela, and Emma, the journey was far from over. But they were no longer just enduring the challenges. They were shaping the future, one act of love and courage at a time. And for Emma, who had once wondered why people looked at her family differently, there was no doubt about who they were. "We're strong," she said one evening as Darren tucked her into bed. "And we're a family forever." "Forever," Darren agreed, kissing her forehead. "And always." Carrying the torch forward. The Campbells had come to symbolize resilience and change in Clearwater, but their journey of growth was not meant to end at the Friendship Fair. The event's success sparked new initiatives in the town, inspired by both the courage of Darren's family and the collective momentum that had been building since the park incident. As the seasons changed, Darren, Angela, and Emma continued to make an indelible impact on the town's culture. However, new challenges awaited them, ensuring their mission of love and acceptance remained ever relevant. The Clearwater Youth Council. In the months following the Friendship Fair, Darren was approached by the town's mayor, Linda Hargrove, with a proposal. Linda, a progressive leader who had watched Darren's family inspire the community, wanted to establish a Clearwater Youth Council. This program would empower the town's young people to lead inclusivity projects, address community needs, and develop their own leadership skills. I can't think of anyone better to guide this initiative than you, Darren, Linda said during their meeting. You've already shown the town what can happen when people take a stand for what's right. Let's give our kids the tools to keep building on that. Darren was honored but hesitant. His engineering work and commitments to Emma and Angela already took much of his time. This is a big responsibility, he admitted, but I see how much good it could do. Let me talk it over with my family. That evening, Darren brought the idea to Angela and Emma. What do you think? He asked, looking between them. Angela nodded thoughtfully. It's a wonderful opportunity, Darren. I know it'll be a lot, but if anyone can do it, it's you. Emma grinned. Does this mean I can be on the youth council, Daddy? Darren laughed. It's for older kids, but maybe one day. For now, you can help me come up with ideas. The Clearwater Youth Council launched 3 months later, with Darren as its director. Its first project was a mentorship program pairing high school students with younger kids, helping them navigate challenges like bullying, cultural differences, and self-confidence. Emma, though too young to join officially, became a sort of unofficial mascot, attending events and sharing her experiences with the older kids. The festival's ripple effect. The success of the Friendship Fair and the Festival of Unity extended beyond Clearwater's borders. News of the town's initiatives began spreading to neighboring communities, and Darren received an invitation to speak at a statewide diversity summit. The summit, held in the capital city, brought together leaders from schools, businesses, and community organizations. Darren was nervous but determined. He knew this was an opportunity to share Clearwater's story and inspire others to take similar steps. Standing at the podium in front of hundreds of attendees, Darren began by recounting the park incident. He spoke about the assumptions Karen had made and the pain it caused his family. But he didn't stop there. That day could have broken us, he said, his voice steady. But instead, it became the start of something bigger. It forced our community to take a hard look at itself and ask uncomfortable questions. And it reminded me that even in the face of ignorance, we have a choice. We can give in to anger and bitterness, or we can build something better. He ended with a challenge. Ask yourselves, what kind of legacy do you want to leave for the next generation? For your children, your neighbors, your community. It's not enough to talk about change. We have to live it. The room erupted into applause, and Darren left the stage feeling a mix of relief and pride. Over the next few days, he connected with other community leaders, exchanging ideas and strategies to foster inclusivity in their towns. Emma's big idea. As Darren expanded his work through the Youth Council and speaking engagements, Emma continued to grow into a confident and compassionate young girl. Inspired by her experiences and her father's work, she came to Darren one evening with an idea. "Daddy," she said, climbing onto the couch beside him, "I want to write a book." Darren raised an eyebrow. "A book? What kind of book?" "A book about families," Emma explained, her eyes shining with excitement. "Like ours, and Lucas's, and everyone else's. So kids can see that all families are special, even if they don't look the same." Darren smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's a beautiful idea, Emma. What would you call it?" Emma thought for a moment before declaring, "All the colors of family." Angela, overhearing the conversation, joined them on the couch. "I love it," she said. "We can help you write it, and maybe even get it published." Over the next few weeks, the three of them worked on the book together. Emma drew pictures of different families, some with two moms, some with single parents, some with kids who looked nothing like their siblings. Darren and Angela helped her write simple, heartfelt descriptions for each page. When the book was finished, they printed copies to share with Emma's class and the local library. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and soon, other schools in the area requested copies for their classrooms. Karen's ultimate redemption. Karen Matthews had spent the past year working tirelessly to redeem herself, but she still carried the guilt of her actions. She felt she owed Darren and his family something more, a gesture that would show her genuine remorse and gratitude for their forgiveness. One afternoon, she approached Darren with an idea. "I want to create a scholarship," she said, her voice filled with determination, "for kids in our community who face challenges because of who they are. I'd like to name it after Emma, if you'll allow it." Darren was stunned. "A scholarship?" Karen nodded. "Emma's courage inspired me. She's wise beyond her years, and I think her story can inspire others too." After discussing it with Angela and Emma, Darren agreed. The Emma Campbell Scholarship for Resilience and Inclusivity was announced at the next town meeting. The scholarship would provide financial support for college-bound students who had overcome adversity and demonstrated a commitment to fostering understanding in their communities. The first recipient was Lucas, the shy boy Emma had stood up for at recess. When his name was announced, he hugged Emma tightly, tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "You changed my life." A community transformed. As the years passed, the changes in Clearwater became undeniable. The town that had once been hesitant to confront its biases had transformed into a model of inclusivity and compassion. The initiatives Darren and his family had championed, Family Week, the Youth Council, the Festival of Unity, became annual traditions, celebrated by all. Emma grew into a strong, empathetic young woman, continuing her father's work in her own way. All the Colors of Family became a published children's book, spreading its message far beyond Clearwater. Karen's scholarship helped dozens of students pursue their dreams, leaving a legacy of hope and resilience. Darren and Angela often reflected on how far they had come since that fateful day in the park. What began as a painful encounter had blossomed into a journey of growth, healing, and transformation, not just for their family, but for an entire community. And through it all, one truth remained constant: love, in all its forms, was the most powerful force of all. "Forever and always," Darren said one evening as he tucked Emma into bed. Emma smiled sleepily. "Forever and always, Daddy."